Hi, I'm three-time Emmy Award watcher Alex Fraioli. You know, I love retro games. So much so, in fact, that I moved to Japan in 2006 and opened a retro video game bar in 2014 that, as of this recording, is miraculously still going. I'm about to turn 40, and oh boy, have my gaming tastes changed in the past 20 years. These days, I generally prefer 2D to 3D games, but I've been racking my brain trying to figure out why I feel that way. So I decided to read some smart people and see what they had to say about it. Come with me, won't you? Thank you. The inspiration and primary text for this video is A Visual Renegade, a phenomenological and aesthetical examination of pixel art by Sergio Paez, with a few bits and pieces from boss fight books Final Fantasy VI by Sebastian Decken. Disclaimer, I'm not an expert on game design or semiotics or cognitive psychology. All I have is 40 years experience being me. These videos are to serve as a means for me to understand my own brain. I feel ways about stuff, but I'd like to find out why. So first, I'd like to take you back to the past. Here, I wrote a song about it. When people try to explain the appeal of pixel art, the word that gets tossed around most often is nostalgia. The way I see it, nostalgia operates in two powerful ways. Something reminds you of the pleasant or idyllic aspects of your childhood, thereby creating a positive association. But also, that same thing may have served as a means to escape or cope during tumultuous times of your life, thereby also creating a positive association. I think most of us have a combination of these memories. I remember playing Dragon Warrior in a friend's basement at 7 years old, a time in our lives when we had no cares. We didn't have to worry about taxes or jury duty or visiting the dermatologist. At that stage in your life, all you have to do is have fun until your mom calls you upstairs to dinner, where an entire meal has been prepared for you. This happened every day. Conversely, drama-heavy JRPGs like Xenogears or Suikoden 2 helped me get through high school, the worst place on earth. And we remember it all, because these are the formative years. Memories and associations imprinted on a young brain are going to retain clarity and serve as an anchor to that point in your life. When you play DuckTales on the NES now, sure, there's a part of your brain that appreciates the experience objectively. It's a well-made game. But more likely than not, part of you is also flashing back to that time in the 5th grade when you and your friend Matt stayed up until 1 a.m. to reclaim your title as the richest duck in the world. Young players do not report a nostalgic interaction with pixel art. They see it as an old-fashioned aesthetic, or resembling good video games from the past. And that makes sense. It's unreasonable to expect other people to hold nostalgia or even appreciation for things that they didn't closely grow up with. I started playing video games with the Sega Master System, and soon after that, the NES. As a result, I don't particularly enjoy games from before that era. I can appreciate their influence, but there's not a lot else there for me. I can't watch those Kids React to videos where they make young kids sit down and play Mega Man 2 and they're just like, "It's old! This is so bad!" But put any Atari or Coleco game in front of me and I will react exactly like those kids. What is this? What is any of this supposed to be? I never thought I'd say this, but please let me play Bayou Billy. I think everyone's got a visual threshold when it comes to enjoying video games, and that's where mine was. 8-bit or bust. I completely understand how a young person might be put off by the NES, or really any pixel art in general. It was, after all, an aesthetic born out of necessity. But it was expanded upon by different artists and developers in a burgeoning industry, all working off the same hardware with the same constraints. And it was these constraints that ended up giving each individual console of the day their own unique charm. The more constraints one imposes, the more one frees oneself, wrote Igor Stravinsky in his book Poetics of Music. And the arbitrariness of the constraints serves only to obtain precision of execution. As a creative writing major, I was handed a lot of writing prompts. The ones I dreaded were broad and vague, like, write a coming-of-age story. The ones I loved were specific, like, write a story about a dog that has 24 hours to solve 3 riddles. Paez writes, the graphics produced in this era pushed the creative limits of the designers by finding a balance between technology and artistic capabilities. He then quotes Kevin Backus, co-creator of the Xbox. There are things that had to happen in the 8-bit era that could not have happened without those kinds of constraints. People had to be clever. Hardware constraints of the day facilitated originality and creativity that birthed a unique visual style. a style so striking that it elicits nostalgic reactions from pretty much everyone who grew up with it. Because video games as a medium had a huge advantage. The nostalgia element appeals to adult players who played pixel art video games in childhood. For many, the first exposure to video games' exciting and pristine world was through pixel art visuals. As a result, a remembrance of this emotional moment could be revisited through the similarity of the graphics through the lens of nostalgia. I think the reason that video games made the impact they did on our child selves is because of the agency they afforded us. To a parent, video games were just an expensive new toy, but to us, they were portals to endless new worlds. And yeah, as a kid, I enjoyed my share of the more popular analog toys, your Lego, your Play-Doh. But video games offered something new and exciting: control. Specifically, control at a time of our lives when we didn't have much of it. An invitation to participate in a narrative. This sense of adventure is what laid the groundwork for our emotional attachment to the style and the medium at large. Nostalgia appears as an added dimension to the experience produced by pixel art. This dimension probably adds a distinctive emotional layer to the experience for specific players who have an emotional attachment to the style. We are inextricably linked to these games and images through the power of nostalgia. When it comes to repackaging and selling your own childhood back to you, companies lean real hard on nostalgia because it's such a universally potent thing. Our emotional attachment to these products is no secret. Naturally, pixel art's nostalgic, easily digestible visual qualities make it a prime candidate for slapping on a t-shirt. People like me who grew up in the 80s and 90s are now a target demographic with expendable income and a weakness for cultural references. Nostalgia bait is a credible design ethos that shows no sign of slowing. Nostalgia is not supposed to be a meal. Nostalgia is a spice. Movies like Pixels or Ready Player One try to make a meal out of nostalgia when it's probably not healthy to consume that much. Just to clarify, I'm only talking about consumption, branding, merchandising, any way that companies and film studios will try to sell you that nostalgic rush. Alright, I'm not a total curmudgeon. Of course it's okay to enjoy things from your past on your own terms. Decken mentions early on in his book that admiring something this way is not strictly the same as commodified reminiscence. It is not necessarily nostalgia to revisit art. It's work. It's a form of study, a critical decision, an expression of appreciation. It's part of our human desire to be moved, to transcend. Okay, alright, so, in moderation, nostalgia's great, I love it, my business depends on it. But there's a little more to pixel art than just, duh, hey, I remember that.
I reject your reality and substitute my own.
Semiotics is the study of signs and symbols and their use or interpretation. And it's a key facet of pixel art. Decken explains it like this. That's semiotics. We take a video game's graphics in as a visual signal, and we interpret what those signals mean. A person, a coin, an octopus, a treasure chest. We recognize that they're not real people or treasure chests, but we imagine them as their real-life counterparts. Our mind fills in the blanks for us. And the more it does that, the more the line blurs between our lived reality and the game's signaled reality, the more immersed we are. Meanwhile, Paez goes into detail. Pixel art is read as a sign whose meaning is subjectively defined and does not require an explicit reality's resemblance. The experience is happening in the player's mind actively and imaginatively. The interaction of the pixels and the player's mental repertoire constitute the experience. Paez refers to this process as imaginative approximation, and it is the key component in pixel art's striking effects. The limitation provided by the pixel grid becomes an essential element in pixel art graphics. The adaptation to the grid configures a determinant aesthetic that not only provides a distinctive appearance, but also forces the abstraction of the represented images that later require a reconfiguration process by the player. And the thing inside your head responsible for reconfiguring these images is a little guy called imagination. Kant's state of play, in which imagination mediates the recreation of the cognitive faculties to give coherence to the picture, consistently occurs when approximating pixel art imagery. Imagination becomes the sovereign entity that intercedes and compasses the aesthetical experience of pixel art. We love using our imaginations, but different people like to exercise their imaginations in different ways. As an image becomes more abstract and pixelized, the hardship of the organization of the image increases. Subsequently, the more challenging the organization process is, the more involvement of the imagination could occur. This is what Paez is referring to. It's a graphic included in his article entitled Figure 36, Imagination Involvement Chart. The pixel art on the left requires more imaginative muscle to interpret as a link, while the more conventionalist one on the right includes more visual information, which lightens the mental load. I personally prefer something towards the left, but when it comes to video games, I find that going too far in either direction turns me off. I don't need this, but I also don't want this. Heart Machine Studios' Alex Preston states that pixel art is an accessible visual form that people could easily get invested in thanks to its abstract properties. This abstract condition leaves space for an open interpretation by the players who can make it their own because they are filling in the gaps. I love this phrase. This is the way I had been phrasing it in my head for years before reading any of these materials. It just felt like a natural way to describe how these games made me feel. Our brains are filling in the gaps, like pouring water into a glass of ice cubes. And in the process, getting a workout and deriving meaning and pleasure from the images. At the end of the process, you're drinking a glass of ice water that's equal parts you and the creator. When experiencing beauty, the imagination's cognitive faculties and understanding are in a free and harmonious state of play. This means that something beautiful is being looked at. Then, the cognitive faculties play. I've stared at every tier of the final Kefka fight in FF6 trying to make out just what the hell everything is. I think there's a tiger and a dancer and a shirtless guy and just a lot of teeth and fangs in there. Every time I look at it, I end up focusing on a new detail and my mind goes off in a different direction. It rules. As the last mainline 2D Final Fantasy game, FF6 had some of the best artwork and graphics seen on the SNES, thanks to the styles and techniques honed by Squaresoft veterans. Those lush enemy sprites come care of monster designer Tetsuya Nomura. You've also got character portraits by Yoshitaka Amano, which even managed to retain some of their ethereal, wispy quality after being scanned and crushed down into tiny character portraits. Amano's general character designs were also interpreted and adapted by Kazuko Shibuya to produce, in my opinion, one of the greatest rosters of heroes on the SNES. Just looking at this screen for me activates joy. The inputs that emerged from the concept art process had a less distant result in the pixel art translation. These newly offered possibilities opened the range of pixel art substyles within the games. Some could have a realistic intention, while others could have a cartoonish style. Still, the abstraction process is present. The SNES was great at expressing everything from cutesy anime-style sprites to more realistic characters or scenes in mystery and horror games. But like Paez says, both require at least some amount of imaginative approximation, because at the end of the day, your brain is still cobbling together an image from a collection of arranged squares. A bad gestalt is an experience with two inherent qualities involved: the disunity of the parts and the unconventionality of the interaction of the parts. When these qualities are present, imagination assists in favoring comprehension in a productive thinking process. In philosopher Nicholas Wiltshire's terms, imagining is an experience in which disparate parts are combined into whole, complex, intentional experiences with properties that are not inherent in the parts. In other words, says Paez, imagination is mainly a cognitive experience that tries to steer a bad gestalt to a successful good gestalt. Dog Gestalt is the perfect example here because it seems to have been a widespread interpretation of this sprite. As a kid, I always thought the Emperor in FF6 looked like a dog, and judging by the presence of this minion and this portrait in FF14, so did a lot of other people. Enough for the dev team to say, hey, that's pretty funny. It's a specific yet unintended reading of the sprite that occurred independently in the minds of fans all across the world. Quick aside about this guy's name because I used it for the pun. Some fans think that the Emperor's name, Gestalt, is related to the concept of Gestalt and that this may imply something about his character or role in the story, but it's just a coincidence thanks to our pal, Ted Woolsey. The Emperor's Japanese name is Gastora or Gastra, which, I don't know, maybe he's a foodie? It explains the banquet scene, certainly. Did anyone else interpret the were-rat's ears as bulbous eyes when they were a kid? I even remember arguing with friends about the sprite's gender in Secret of Mana. In my mind, I knew him to be male, but his cute, chibi Japanese design came across as feminine to a lot of young American boys. While grabbing clips for this video on stream, one of my Twitch regulars, Vomino, pointed out that the sprite has always been gender neutral in the Japanese versions of the game. The masculine pronouns we saw on the SNES were a Ted Woolsey choice, and the sprite's gender neutrality was preserved in the more recent PS4 remake of the game. Thanks, Vomino! Nonogram puzzle games like Picross are a rich source of bad gestalt. Check out these puzzles I solved, depicting a double deadlifting snowman and the back of Chrono's head. Oops, I mean race car and sea anemone. This one is obviously a beholder from popular tabletop role-playing game, Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, fine. Okay, so our imaginations know how to take a pixel image and run away with it, getting some exercise, getting that runner's high of imaginative approximation. How does this kind of visual input stack up against modern video games? Paez begins by defining the modern visual design philosophy of video games and examining why they are the way they are. The migration of pixel art to 3D was addressed in an unmistakable advance toward more immersive and impactful experiences within video games. It was not the quickest advance. As a kid, I remember seeing screenshots of FF7 and Ocarina of Time in magazines and being excited, but also confused. This is the next generation? I mean, I have to take your word for it, but it doesn't stir anything in the imagination. Coming off lush visual 16-bit masterpieces like Chrono Trigger and FF6, this felt like a regression of expression. But early 3D was just like that, and I started to warm up to 3D games about halfway through the PS1's life cycle. This may explain why my two favorite PS1 games both start with Suikoden. The visual estimation of modern games includes terms like 4K, frames per second, and high def. There are two motivations involved in this graphical improvement preference. First, the developer's ambition to create an immersive and engaging experience. The technical capacity of video game graphics arises as a fundamental asset in this quest. Developers use detailed visuals to draw you into the world, to immerse you in their creation. Secondly, since the earlier video game generations, the graphical quality of the games is more than just the representation of the game on the screen. The graphics are also a competitive asset used by corporations to accomplish a better commercial performance. This almost feels too obvious to mention, but yes, visuals are the first thing that people notice about video games. And if your game looks better to the average consumer, you've already got them on the hook. Paez uses the term aestheticization to describe this increasing emphasis on these visual qualities. Graphics are the main attribute to stand out. Pixel art stands as a visual language that declines to participate in today's aestheticization turmoil. Despite their appearance, pixelated images are not cataloged as outdated. Instead, they are seen as a medium of expression that stimulates the player in a particular manner. Paez emphasizes pixel art's role and abilities while also lamenting the trend towards conventional realism. Unfortunately, the stimulative aspect is dominant nowadays, while the delay quality that allows discomfort and imagination involvement is relegated. When everything becomes beautiful, nothing is beautiful anymore. Endless excitement leads to indifference. For his article, Paez interviewed Diego Alexander Huerfano, better known as Mirdinsky, a Colombian designer and illustrator who works primarily with pixel art. Mirdinsky notes that he and his programmer and illustrator friends feel a certain way regarding modern games. We think contemporary hyper-realistic games deliver pre-chewed graphics that, in visual terms, do not stimulate the player's imaginative possibilities. Mirdinsky explains, for example, in a new game, when a character moves its arm, the clothes move accordingly to the wind and the physics. But in old games, the clothes, wind, and movement details are missing. In this case, you complete the missing pieces with your imagination. This is why the experience is different. Pixel art does not always aim to accurately imitate the natural outer world. Instead, it shows an uncommon and irregular representation of a world built by the game developers. Putting together impressive 3D visuals is a technical feat that takes years of learning and practice. It's just not the kind of visual language that resonates with me. That doesn't mean I don't find it impressive or beautiful in its own way, just that it's not a prerequisite for enjoyment. On the other hand, if the creator has something interesting to say or needs to tell their story in a specific way, I can be receptive to that. Last Guardian is a good example of this. A gorgeous world deliberately rendered in the service of its story. I enjoyed the game because I went into it wanting Fumito Ueda to tell me a beautiful story, and he did. Paez interviewed several more video game designers and artists, specifically asking them about their relationship with the style of pixel art graphics and its advantages over realism. Jean-Luc Savard, lead animator and character artist at Sabotage Studio, makes a common comparison. He considers pixel art as an ideal place for imagination. For him, it is like reading a book, while the hyper-realistic 3D games are closer to watching a movie. The Game Kitchen's concept pixel artist Jesus Nerkin makes the same comparison. It's not the same when you're playing a AAA game when you can see every pore of the characters with outstanding technical quality. Pixel art is more like books. While reading, your imagination recomposes the world you are discovering. You make the game. You see something with low resolution, and your imagination does the rest. Here's my deal. My eyes are bad. I am easily overwhelmed by an overload of visual information. When video game resolution started climbing, and HUDs and text boxes started shrinking, my ability to focus on everything happening on screen started falling, as did my overall enjoyment of these types of games. The fact that my eyes have trouble tracking movement and processing loads of visual data in high definition probably explains why I prefer 2D games and why this video exists in the first place. Sidebar! For the most part, I agree with the whole books versus movies comparison. They're both different media with different strengths. But another comparison worth exploring might be practical effects in film versus CG. I think that if nostalgia is a spice, so is jank. Maybe the appreciation of jank is something learned, similar to an appreciation of pixel art. And instead of 8 and 16-bit video games, it comes from a childhood full of cheesy movies. Low-budget practical effects have a certain kind of charm because they beg the viewer's imagination to complete that cognitive leap for a scene or effect to read as believable. CG lacks this charm. The more ambitious computer effects end up looking too smoothed over or too obvious. Practical effects can have a more powerful impression on the imagination because they exist physically in the same space as the actors and environment. When the chestburster first pops out and skitters along the table in Alien, that's some classic silver screen jank. When the equivalent happens in a modern production, that's probably CG. We can point at both scenes and say, that's fake, but we don't necessarily mean the same thing. I'm not a big MCU guy, but I generally like those films up until the third act, which is usually a lengthy, labored CG slugfest. And I feel like I'm watching a video game. We know that video games aren't real, but the qualities that make them visually engaging can often get smoothed over in the pursuit of conventional 3D realism. End sidebar! Cartoonish and abstract images like those usually depicted in pixel art allow the player to contribute to the comprehension of the image with their own ideas. With pixel art, the observer contributes to the storytelling, while in realism, the individual is immersed in the story. None of the experiences is better than the other. The point of this video is not, pixel art's better! There is absolutely space in my life and my gaming diet for high-res 3D video games, when I'm in the mood for them. I've been a Resident Evil fan since 1995, and that series still does it for me. Atmosphere, immersion, fun visuals, solid game flow. But in the same way that I don't watch movies every day, I also don't feel the need to play modern games that often. I'm good with one AAA game a year, because once I finish it, the novelty of being immersed in someone else's world has worn off. I find it exhausting to be there. 2D games I can revisit much more frequently. Pixel art to me is calming, familiar, and engaging. Instead of explicitly telling me how to view its world, it's giving me a rough guideline. 2D games are also a lot easier for me to pick up and play after taking a long break. When I return to the world of a 3D game, I feel like I'm undergoing a reacclimation process. Because of their high degree of immersion, there's a lot of relevant information required for a player to exist and act meaningfully in a 3D world. It's like going back to work or school after a long vacation. What was I doing again? Who are you people? Decken interviewed Final Fantasy series composer Nobuo Uematsu for his book, who had this to say. It's a little sad that Final Fantasy VI was the last chibi Final Fantasy game. I wish I could have done one or two more with the same atmosphere. Uematsu understands that these games have a specific tone, style, and vibe. He acknowledged that for some of us, something small but vital was traded away when the industry's focus transitioned to conventional realism. Naturally, Decken includes a whole chapter on FF6's opera sequence, and he sums up my feelings best when describing the cheesy charm of the opera's warbly tones. The weirdest voices are the ones you recognize best. The glossiest ones all sound the same. So, what's pixel art up to these days? A niche of gamers still purchases and enjoys pixel art games. To them, the rugged, pixelated, low-res, and stylized visuals of pixel art offer a different experience, something hyper-realistic 3D cannot replicate. A relatively more elaborated pixel art style that is closer to the games developed in the 32-bit era, but includes lighting and animation effects that were not possible before. This new pixel art style is named high-bit. A fundamental ability for pixel artists is to use the least pixels to generalize something specific. This is still an important skill for modern pixel artists to have, but you can see how, due to increasing resolutions and levels of detail, the visuals no longer lean as heavily on imaginative approximation. The style itself has become the main mode of expression. And that's great! This stuff is gorgeous! In the modern day, the pixel aesthetic is no longer forced by constraint. It's a choice. Good high-bit games make that choice for a reason, and that reason isn't just nostalgia. Mirdinsky suggests that if a hyper-realistic image and a pixel art image were shown to an AI software, it is more likely that the machine successfully interprets the hyper-realistic one, considering that the imagination ingredient is absent. When your brain undergoes imaginative approximation, you are drawing on countless memories and experiences to devise your own unique interpretation of the object. Your brain is the original neural network. You might find charm or meaning where a machine would fail to see anything of note. And yes, of course they will eventually find a way to approximate the eccentricities of a human's imagination through AI, but it will never be exactly the same as your own unique interpretation, because no machine can have your specific memories, experiences, and personality. Pixel art appears as a renegade in the aestheticization urgency of the video game industry, and proposes a gaming experience with a unique experience, supported by an imaginary, cognitive amusement. Cognitive amusement is why most of us play video games. 2D pixel art tickles a specific part of the brain that conventional 3D realism does not. Most of the time, I prefer that experience. But like I said, sometimes my brain is too tired to participate, and I do just want to watch a movie. My hope for this video was that if you've ever caught yourself feeling similar in regards to pixel art, maybe now you have a better understanding of why. In conclusion, pixel art can stimulate your brain in ways that 3D can't. Nostalgia is fine, but it's not enough on its own. Realism has more mass appeal and is the AAA default because commercial video games are a business first and an art form second, and everyone's imagination is different. Just make sure yours gets a workout now and again. Just make sure yours doesn't skip leg day. Just play a Mario. Go play a Mario. Play like an old Mario. Hi, this was fun, and thank you for watching it. Please let me know on Twitter or in the comments or whatever if you enjoyed this sassafras, if you have any thoughts about pixels or whatever. Listen to the No More Whoppers podcast. And if you already do, thank you. Now load it up on your friends and family's phones when they're not looking. Or, to be extra bold, when they are.